In all of the national polling that I have seen, we are beating Donald Trump by much greater margins than his Secretary Clinton. We started this campaign at 3% in the polls, 60 points behind Clinton. Now in the last poll that I've seen, we're 1 point up. So we have the momentum, and I think a lot of the super delegates are now beginning to look at which Democratic candidate is in the best place to defeat Donald Trump.
Vermont Senator and Democratic Socialist Bernie Sanders on NBC's Meet the Press about how Democrat superdelegates will see Sanders' momentum as the only candidate to be able to defeat Donald Trump in November. It was a big weekend for Bernie. He won all 3 Democrat states up for grabs, Alaska, Hawaii, and Washington, by a landslide. Now, the delegate count is still very much in Mrs. Clinton's favor, but she's only won 2 out of 7 of the latest primaries and caucuses. For more on this, let's call on our political panel. Joining me at the anchor desk, former Chief of Staff to Congressman Walter B. Jones, Glen Downs, and from Newsmax, New York, senior political contributor for Forbes.com, Rick Ungar. So, Rick, since you're our panelist leaning to the left, just kind of curious on Bernie's situation. Still a long way to go to catch up and pass Hillary Clinton. I mean, Hillary's got like, what, 1,243 pledged delegates? Bernie now with 975. And when it comes to super delegates, 469 for Secretary Clinton and only 23 for Bernie. So can Bernie somehow ride this momentum and take away the nomination?
Well, anything, I suppose, is possible, but it is an incredibly narrow road for Bernie Sanders. Look, his success has come primarily in caucus states. There are a few left, but they're very, very small, places like Guam, just small areas. The other reality is it looks like he would have to pull a major upset in either Wisconsin and or New York. He's trailing way behind in New York. He could do well in Wisconsin. He could actually even win Wisconsin. But see, the problem is he has to win by incredibly wide margins. If he wins by a few points, he ends up effectively splitting the delegates. So it's very, very hard to see how he can do it at this point.
So Glen Downs, the situation there on the left, we were talking earlier in this program how Washington claims there's all this panic about a gender gap for Donald Trump. Isn't there panic for our friends on the left about Hillary Clinton and the FBI sniffing around her situation there? I mean, there still is a chance that it's not necessarily going to be the primaries and caucuses that do in Mrs. Clinton's campaign.
It could be the Justice Department. There's not panic on the left, although I think they've dramatically underplayed the prospect of this being a real problem for her. In fact, there are credible news reports today that the FBI has now gotten permission to directly question her, and there are 150 or so agents that have been put on this. So we've got sources within the Secret Service and other places that indicate that this has never been a dead issue. So that would be one of the wild cards in this wild card year that could move the needle.
Rick Ungar, I have to ask you about this situation because, a few months ago we were talking about Joe Biden getting into this thing or somebody else getting into the race. Is there still an opportunity, or would it take an indictment to change what happens on the Democrat side?
Well, it was always going to take an indictment to bring Joe Biden into the race ever since he said he wasn't interested in running. And JD, I have been very forthright in my attitude about the possible trouble for Mrs. Clinton. I've always said that the one thing that could disrupt her would be the Justice Department. I have to tell you, I think we have to be really, really careful. There's nothing remarkable about the fact that we've now learned that they're going to interview her. Anybody who understands a criminal investigation, and this is a criminal investigation no matter what they call it, knows that they're going to interview her, they're going to interview her staff. What's interesting is there has never been a lot of panic in the Democratic Party. I often thought they were underselling the possibilities. However, what I'm hearing now more than anything is that most of the odds are against her being indicted. I'm not quite sure why, to tell you the truth. I don't know what somebody knows to suggest that, but I'm actually seeing more sighs of relief in the party.
Well, Glenn, we've heard some talk around Washington. Very interesting. FBI Director Comey wanted to see this brought to a conclusion before the elections. There's talk really of a schism between the FBI and the Attorney General's office within the Department of Justice. There's no doubt that our fellow North Carolinian, Loretta Lynch, is just doing the bidding of the White House. It would be shocking if an indictment came out of this Justice Department.
Well, it would be shocking, but it's absolutely no question about it that the fact that she's being questioned is routine if she was just anybody else. But that there's no doubt in my mind that before the decision was made going back to when they first seized the servers, that was something that had to have, in my mind, been run by the President of the United States. So the fact that they're going to question her at this point is not something that's just happening in a routine way. This had to have gotten sign off from somebody in the White House, pretty high up.
What about that, Rick Unger?
No,
in addition
really
to being, go ahead.
No. See,
30 seconds.
JD, this is the problem. This is the problem. I mean, in my mind, clearly, Hillary Clinton is guilty at least of poor judgment and maybe a whole lot more. But you throw things around like saying, there's all this talk. No, there really isn't. Nobody really knows what this investigation is yielding. All of this talk that the Justice Department is going to squelch it, do you really think that would stay a secret? What I hear people doing on the Republican side is setting up their campaign for if she doesn't get indicted. You can do that if you want to, but those of us who are actually interested in knowing if Mrs. Clinton did break the law, I want to know. We're not going to go for that. The
well,
FBI,
and we appreciate
there's nobody who's
I can
no
understand.
straighter arrow than James Comey.
Well, that may be true, but I'm sorry, when it comes to the Attorney General, I have my doubts. Glen Downs here on the anchor desk, Rick Unger in New York. We thank you. Back with more after this.